As Washington mulls sending more advanced weapons to the Ukrainian government, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrived in Kiev. During a joint press conference with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, Kerry blamed the ongoing fighting in the east on Moscow. The U.S. Secretary of State also unveiled a $16 million aid package for the country.
We are receiving maximum possible assistance from our American partners.
We talked about the largest threat that Ukraine faces today, and that is Russia's continued aggression in the east. We cannot close our eyes to tanks that are crossing the border from Russia and coming in to Ukraine. We can't close our eyes to Russian fighters in unmarked uniforms crossing the border and leading individual companies of so-called separatists in battle. We can't close our eyes to modern rockets and modern radar capacity and other capacity that has crossed the border in order to prosecute this conflict across sovereign lines, across international borders, against all the promises that were made in the Minsk ceasefire agreement.
Meanwhile, in Brussels, NATO agreed on a major boost to the alliance's presence near the Russian border, including a quick reaction spearhead force of 5,000 troops. The move was approved by defense ministers from member states meeting in Brussels.
I expect that they will decide on a force which will be around 30,000. And part of that enhanced NATO response force, I expect, will be the establishment of this spearhead force.
Well, in response to NATO's decision, Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree calling on reservists for military training. Talk of lethal weapons being sent to Ukraine has also seen opposition from Moscow, as well as defense ministers in the European Union. The Russian Foreign Ministry warned Washington against such a move, saying that it could cause colossal damage to ties between the former Cold War foes.
We are very seriously concerned by these plans, taking into account the revanchist plans of the party war in Kiev. This could not only escalate the conflict in the southeast, but also threaten the security of Russia.
The question of more weapons in this area will not bring us closer to a solution and will not end the suffering of the population.
This as French President François Hollande and German Chancellor Angela Merkel also arrived in Kiev, and with them a new initiative to end the crisis. While Paris and Berlin chose diplomacy rather than arming Kiev's troops against the separatists, Hollande said negotiations could not drag on forever.
We will leave for Kiev as soon as this afternoon. We will make a new proposal to solve the conflict. It will be based on Ukraine's territorial integrity, and we will talk about it with President Poroshenko today and Friday in Moscow with the Russian president, because time is running out. It won't be said that France and Germany together haven't tried everything, undertaken everything to preserve peace.
Despite a race for a solution on the diplomatic front, the fighting continues in eastern Ukraine. At least 21 people have been killed and scores of others injured as a result of the ongoing fighting between pro-Russian separatists and forces loyal to Kiev. Shelling in the eastern city of Donetsk has left buildings in ruins.
About 5 p.m. we got a gift from Poroshenko. It was about 5. This is a gift from Poroshenko. I don't know where they shoot from, but our house was damaged, as well as another 14-story building.
We moved here and rented an apartment to temporarily escape these terrible events. And yesterday, while we were at home, a shell or two fell. We were in the kitchen, and our stairwell was all damaged. We all fell on the ground, and then when we were running out, we saw that 3 floors are pierced through, and there are huge holes.
Monitors from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe have called for a 3-day ceasefire around the beleaguered town to allow the evacuation of civilians caught in the crossfire.
The ceasefire agreement has been increasingly violated by all sides, with a major increase in the number and scale of military engagements between combatants along the whole contact line.
According to the United Nations, at least 5,358 people have been killed in fighting in East Ukraine since April, as more and more civilians fall victim to the ongoing fighting.
We can now speak to Moscow-based journalist Alina Malinovskaya for more perspective on that. Alina, what repercussions could arise with NATO and Washington increasing their support base for Kiev, which could potentially be lethal weaponry and a 5,000-strong force?
Well, this is not only the provision of lethal aid, it is as well important that the president will also have on his table an authorization for the spending massive sums of money to destabilize Russia with US propaganda. And there's a plan to sponsor media centers in the former Soviet countries and to fund a US proxy war against Russia in eastern Ukraine. And there's no secrecy about US policy towards Russia, including the US narrative on economic sanctions. One senior official in the Obama administration, when he was discussing Mr. Biden's trip to Brussels to consult with the European leaders on the situation in Ukraine, he said that we do have three different issue areas in play. One is the potential to increase the cost to Russia through economic measures. The second is to make sure that Ukraine has the financial support it needs to move forward. And the third is to enhance Ukraine's ability to defend itself. So how is that possible that they want to negotiate the peace process and promise about $118 million for training for Ukraine's defense ministry?
So would you say that this is simply a backlash on the part of Kiev, given that separatists also mobilized in their thousands just days ago?
Well, Obama signed the Ukraine Freedom Support Act of 2014. And it sounds, by the way, very humanitarian. And it is, in fact, a pretext for the provision of legal aid to Ukraine. And the Western leaders very well know that this is a direct provocation to Russia. And this decision to arm Ukraine revealed that Washington wasn't interested in the de-escalation of the Ukrainian conflict at all. And if we see consequences of the lethal aid coming to Ukraine, that will be just the pretext for Russia needed for the Kremlin to escalate the recent events in Russia as a direct attack by the West. Besides, just a couple of hours ago, in an interview to one Russian media, US Senator John McCain said that the United States is to be blamed for Ukraine's use of cluster bombs since it has not provided the country with different weapons. So it's definitely a green light that they are giving to themselves.
Now, it is interesting. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has blamed the ongoing violence in Ukraine on Russia. But really, as you just mentioned, to what degree is the U.S. responsible for the increasing instability in the country?
Well, while the U.S. and much of the West countries continue to encourage and even to urge Kyiv to continue its suicidal anti-terrorist operation in the country, the Ukrainian state continues to melt down and to drive between in what remains of its population.
Now, would you say that we're seeing the groundwork being laid for a more direct military confrontation between NATO and Russian forces, especially with President Putin's decree increasing his country's military force?
Well, the EU and the US and also NATO, the idea that the West wants to negotiate peace after causing the turmoil in Ukraine and go into war economically against Russia, and this cannot be trusted. And as to NATO, the organization indeed supported the sanctions regime and the military operations, but at the same time, NATO now admits that there is no large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the US ambassador to NATO now says that Russian forces in Ukraine are limited to a command role and specialists. So what happened to the 9,000 troops that Poroshenko was screaming about at the Davos meeting?
So how worried is Moscow to a rapid reaction force by NATO?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I asked how worried is Moscow of a rapid reaction force by NATO?
It is worried, of course, but as maybe you've heard, there was a breaking news that Kiev agreed to a ceasefire in one of the Donetsk regions, and adding this and that the delegation is coming to Moscow to negotiate. There's little hope, but there's still hope that this could end in a peaceful solution.
Well, with all of this in mind, everything that we've been talking about, does this ultimately suggest that really a diplomatic solution is pretty much off the table at this point?
It was off the table for a long time, and but since the thing is that within the country, the influential Ukrainian oligarchs have spoken already against continuing the war against the Donbas separatists, and the situation had begun to seriously threaten the positions of the financial elite in the country, and it requires a change in approach. And the choice is very simple: either a civilized parting of ways, or a war for many years, which will basically weaken the country. It will finish the economy and make every Ukrainian even poorer. Besides, Poroshenko is starting to lose inside his country, and due to his indecisiveness and he's going back and forth between the peace and the war parties. The war is not showing any tangible results, and therefore it causes anti-war sentiments among the population.
All right, we do appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. That is Moscow-based journalist Alina Malinovskaya. Thanks a lot.